valid, because our notion of causation concerns the relations of states of things within the actual world, and can only be illegitimately extended to a transcendent derivation. The notion of God, which will be discussed later, cf. Part 5, is that of an actual entity immanent in the actual world, but transcending any finite cosmic epoch of being at once actual, eternal, immanent, and transcendent. The transcendence of 6 cf. Science and Fet Modern World, ch. 3. 7. This quotation is taken from Jebb's Life of Bentley, ch. 2. The Life is published in the English Men of Letters series. 94. Discussions and applications. God is not peculiar to him. Every actual entity, in virtue of its novelty, transcends its universe, God included. In the Scholium, space and time, with all their current mathematical properties, are ready-made for the material masses. The material masses are ready-made for the forces which constitute their action and reaction, and space, and time, and material masses, and forces, are 144 alike ready-made for the initial motions which the deity impresses throughout the universe. It is not possible to extract from the Scholium construed with misplaced concreteness either a theism, or an atheism, or an epistemology, which can survive a comparison with the facts. This is the inescapable conclusion to be inferred from Hume's dialogues concerning natural religion. Biology is also reduced to a mystery, and finally physics itself has now reached a stage of experimental knowledge inexplicable in terms of the categories of the Scholium. In the Timaeus, there are many phrases and statements which find their final lucid expression in the Scholium. While noting this concurrence of the two great cosmological documents guiding Western thought, it cannot be too clearly understood that, within its limits of abstraction, what the Scholium says is true, and that it is expressed with the lucidity of genius. Thus any cosmological document which cannot be read as an interpretation of the Scholium is worthless. But there is another side to the Timaeus which finds no analogy in the Scholium. In general terms, this side of the Timaeus may be termed its metaphysical character, that is to say, its endeavor to connect the behavior of things with the formal nature of things. The behavior apart from the things is abstract, and so are the things apart from their behavior. Newton wisely, for his purposes, made this abstraction which the Timaeus endeavors to avoid. In the first place, the Timaeus connects behavior with the ultimate molecular characters of the actual entities. Plato conceives the notion of definite societies of actual molecular entities, each society with its defining characteristics. He does not conceive this assemblage of societies as causa sui, but he does conceive it as the work of subordinate deities, who are the animating principles of those departments of nature. In Greek thought, either poetic or philosophic, the separation between the less than J greater than UOL less than, and such deities had not that absolute character which it has for us who have inherited the Semitic Jehovah. 145 Newton could have accepted a molecular theory as easily as Plato, but there is this difference between them. Newton would have been surprised at the modern quantum theory and at the dissolution of quanta into vibrations. Plato would have expected it. While we note the many things said by Plato in the Timaeus which are now foolishness, we must also give him credit for that aspect of his teaching in which he was 2,000 years ahead of his time. Plato accounted for the sharp-cut differences between kinds of natural things, by assuming an approximation of the mole. The order of nature. 95. Relays of the fundamental kinds respectively to the mathematical forms of the regular solids. He also assumed that certain qualitative contrasts in occurrences, such as that between musical notes, depended on the participation of these occurrences in some of the simpler ratios between integral numbers. He thus obtained a reason why there should be an approximation to sharp-cut differences between kinds of molecules, and why there should be sharp-cut relations of harmony standing out amid dissonance. Thus, contrast, as the opposite of incompatibility, depends on a certain simplicity of circumstance, but the higher contrasts depend on the assemblage of a multiplicity of lower contrasts, this assemblage again exhibiting higher types of simplicity. It is well to remember that the modern quantum theory, with its surprises in dealing with the atom, is only the latest instance of a well-marked character of nature, which in each particular instance is only explained by some ad hoc dogmatic assumption. The theory of biological evolution would not in itself lead us to expect the sharply distinguished genera and species which we find in nature. There might be an occasional bunching of individuals round certain typical forms, but there is no explanation of the almost complete absence of intermediate forms. Again, Newton's scholium gives no hint of the 92 possibilities for atoms, or of the limited number of ways in which atoms can be combined so as to form molecules. Physicists are now explaining these 146 chemical facts by means of conceptions which Plato would have welcomed. There is another point in which the organic philosophy only repeats Plato. In the Timaeus, the origin of the present cosmic epoch is traced back to an aboriginal disorder, chaotic according to our ideals. This is the evolutionary doctrine of the philosophy of organism. Plato's notion has puzzled critics who are obsessed with the Semitic theory of a wholly transcendent God creating out of nothing an accidental universe. Newton held the Semitic theory. The scholium made no provision for the evolution of matter very naturally, since the topic lay outside its scope. The result has been that the non-evolution of matter has been a tacit presupposition throughout modern thought. Until the last few years, the sole alternatives were either the material universe, with its present type of order, is eternal, or else it came into being, and will pass out of being, according to the fiat of Jehovah. Thus, on all sides, Plato's allegory of the evolution of a new type of order based on new types of dominant societies became a daydream, puzzling to commentators. Milton, curiously enough, in his Paradise Lost wavers between the Timaeus and the Semitic doctrine. This is only another instance of the intermixture of classical and Hebrew notions on which his charm of 8. The book of Genesis is too primitive to bear upon this point. 96. Discussions and applications. Thought depends. In the description of Satan's journey across chaos, Satan discovers the secrets of the hoary deep, a dark illimitable ocean, without bound, without dimension, where length, breadth and height, and time and place are lost, where eldest night and chaos, ancestors of nature, hold eternal anarchy amidst the noise of endless wars, and by confusion standpoint 9. Milton is here performing for Plato the same poetic service that Lucretius performed for Democritus with 1/4/7 less justification, since Plato was quite capable of being his own poet. Also the fact of Satan's journey helped to evolve order, for he left a permanent track, useful for the devils and the damned. The appeal to Plato in this section has been an appeal to the facts against the modes of expression prevalent in the last few centuries. These recent modes of expression are partly the outcome of a mixture of theology and philosophy, and are partly due to the Newtonian physics, no longer accepted as a fundamental statement. But language and thought have been framed according to that mold, and it is necessary to remind ourselves that this is not the way in which the world has been described by some of the greatest intellects. Both for Plato and for Aristotle, the process of the actual world has been conceived as a real incoming of forms into real potentiality, issuing into that real togetherness which is an actual thing. Also, for the Timaeus, the creation of the world is the incoming of a type of order establishing a cosmic epoch. It is not the beginning of matter of fact, but the incoming of a certain type of social order. Section IV. The remainder of this chapter will be devoted to a discussion largely conjectural of the hierarchy of societies composing our present epoch. In this way, the preceding discussion of order may be elucidated. It is to be carefully noted that we are now deserting metaphysical generality. We shall be considering the more special possibilities of explanation consistent with our general cosmological doctrine, but not necessitated by it. The physical world is bound together by a general type of relatedness which constitutes it into an extensive continuum. When we analyze the properties of this continuum, we discover that they fall into two classes, of which one, the more special, presupposes the other, the more general or the more general type of properties. 148 expresses the mere fact of extensive connection, of whole and part, of various types of geometrical. 9 Paradise Lost, BK. 2, 10 cf. Part 4 for a detailed discussion. The order of nature. 97 elements, derivable by extensive abstraction, but excluding the introduction of more special properties by which straight lines are definable. 11 and measurability thereby introduced. In these general properties of extensive connection, we discern the defining characteristic of a vast nexus extending far beyond our immediate cosmic epoch. It contains in itself other epochs, with more particular characteristics incompatible with each other. Then from the standpoint of our present epoch, the fundamental society insofar as it transcends our own epoch seems a vast confusion mitigated by the few, faint elements of order contained in its own defining characteristic of extensive connection. We cannot discriminate its other epochs of vigorous order, and we merely conceive it as harboring the faint flush of the dawn of order in our own epoch. This ultimate, vast society constitutes the whole environment within which our epoch is set, so far as systematic characteristics are discernible by us in our present stage of development. In the future, the growth of theory may endow our successors with keener powers of discernment. Our logical analysis, in company with immediate intuition, inspectio, enables us to discern a more special society within the society of pure extension. This is the geometrical society. In this society 12 those specialized relationships hold, in virtue of which straight lines are defined. Systematic geometry is illustrated in such a geometrical society, and metrical relationships can be defined in terms of the analogies of function within the scheme of any one systematic geometry. These analogies of function are what is meant by the notion of congruence. This notion is nonsense apart from a systematic geometry. The inclusion of extensive quantity, 149, among fundamental categorical notions is a complete mistake. This notion is definable in terms of each systematic geometry finding its application in a geometrical society. It is to be noticed that a systematic geometry is determined by the definition of straight lines applicable to the society in question. Contrary to the general opinion, this definition is possible in independence of the notion of measurement. It cannot however be proved that in the same geometrical society there may not be competing families of loci with equal claims to the status of being a complete family of straight lines. Given a family of straight lines, expressing a system of relatedness in a geometric society, the notion of congruence, and thence of measurement, is now determinable in a systematic way throughout the society. But again in this case there certainly are competing systems of measurement. Hence in connection with each family of straight lines allowing there be more than one such family there are alternative systems 13 of metrical geom. 11 cf. Part 4, CVs. T3, IV, V. 12 cf. Part 4, especially CVs. 3, IV, V. 13 The existence of alternative systems was demonstrated by Cayley in his 6th memoir on quantics, in Transactions of the Royal Society, 1859, t. 98, Discussions and Applications. Jittery, no one system being more fundamental than the other. Our present cosmic epoch is formed by an electromagnetic society, which is a more special society contained within the geometric society. In this society yet more special defining characteristics obtain. These characteristics presuppose those of the two wider societies within which the electromagnetic society is contained. But in the electromagnetic society the ambiguity as to the relative importance of competing families of straight lines, if there be such competing families, and the ambiguity as to the relative importance of competing definitions of congruence, are determined in favor of one family and 114 congruence definition. This determination is effected by an additional set of physical relationships throughout the society. But this set has lost 150 its merely systematic character because it constitutes our neighborhood. These relationships involve components expressive of certain individual diversities, and identities between the occasions which are the members of the nexus. But these diversities and identities are correlated according to a systematic law expressible in terms of the systematic measurements derived from the geometric nexus. We here arrive at the notion of physical quantities which vary from individual to individual. This is the notion of the systematization of individual differences, the notion of law. It is the ideal of mathematical physicists to formulate this systematic law in its complete generality for our epoch. It is sufficient for our purposes to indicate the presumed character of this law by naming the members of the society, electromagnetic occasions. Thus our present epoch is dominated by a society of electromagnetic occasions. Insofar as this dominance approaches completeness, the systematic law which physics seeks is absolutely dominant. Insofar as the dominance is incomplete, the obedience is a statistical fact with its corresponding lapses. The electromagnetic society exhibits the physical electromagnetic field which is the topic of physical science. The members of this nexus are the electromagnetic occasions. But in its turn, this electromagnetic society would provide no adequate order for the production of individual occasions realizing peculiar intensities of experience unless it were pervaded by more special societies, vehicles of such order. The physical world exhibits a bewildering complexity of such societies, favoring each other, competing with each other. The most general examples of such societies are the regular trains of waves, individual electrons, protons, individual molecules, societies of molecules such as inorganic bodies, living cells, and societies of cells such as vegetable and animal bodies. 14. The transformations into an indefinite variety of coordinates, to which the tensor theory refers, and presuppose one congruent 1 definition. The invariance of the Einsteinian, this expresses this fact. The order of nature. 99. Section B, 151J. It is obvious that the simple classification D. Part 1, ch. 3, sect. 2 of societies into enduring objects, corpuscular societies, and non-corpuscular societies requires amplification. The notion of a society which includes subordinate societies and nexus with a definite pattern of structural interrelations must be introduced. Such societies will be termed structured. A structured society as a whole provides a favorable environment for the subordinate societies which it harbors within itself. Also, the whole society must be set in a wider environment permissive of its continuance. Some of the component groups of occasions in a structured society can be termed subordinate societies. But other such groups must be given the wider designation of subordinate nexus. The distinction arises because in some instances a group of occasions, such as, for example, a particular enduring entity, could have retained the dominant features of its defining characteristic in the general environment, apart from the structured society. It would have lost some features. In other words, the analogous sort of enduring entity in the general environment is, in its mode of definiteness, not quite identical with the enduring entity within the structured environment. But, abstracting such additional details from the generalized defining characteristic, the enduring object with that generalized characteristic may be conceived as independent of the structured society within which it finds itself. For example, we speak of a molecule within a living cell, because its general molecular features are independent of the environment of the cell. Thus a molecule is a subordinate society in the structured society which we call the living cell. But there may be other nexus included in a structured society which, accepting the general systematic characteristics of the external environment, present no features capable of genetically sustaining themselves apart from 152, the special environment provided by that structured society. It is misleading, therefore, to term such a nexus a society, when it is being considered in abstraction from the whole structured society. In such an abstraction it can be assigned no social features. Recurring to the example of a living cell, it will be argued that the occasions composing the empty space within the cell exhibit special features which analogous occasions outside the cell are devoid of. Thus the nexus, which is the empty space within a living cell, is called a subordinate nexus, but not a subordinate society. Molecules are structured societies, and so in improbability are separate electrons and protons. Crystals are structured societies. But gases are not structured societies in any important sense of that term, although their individual molecules are structured societies. It must be remembered that each individual occasion within a special form of society includes features which do not occur in analogous occasions. Discussions and applications. 100. In the external environment. The first stage of systematic investigation must always be the identification of analogies between occasions within the society and occasions without it. The second stage is constituted by the more subtle procedure of noting the differences between behavior within and without the society, differences of behavior exhibited by occasions which also have close analogies to each other. The history of science is marked by the vehement, dogmatic denial of such differences, until they are found out. An obvious instance of such distinction of behavior is afforded by the notion of the deformation of the shape of an electron according to variations in its physical situation. A structured society may be more or less complex in respect to the multiplicity of its associated sub-societies and sub-nexus and to the intricacy of their structural pattern. A structured society which is highly complex can be 153 correspondingly favorable to intensity of satisfaction for certain sets of its component members. This intensity arises by reason of the ordered complexity of the contrasts which the society stages for these components. The structural relations gather intensity from this intensity in the individual experiences. Thus the growth of a complex structured society exemplifies the general purpose pervading nature. The mere complexity of givenness which procures incompatibilities has been superseded by the complexity of order which procures contrasts. Section B. The doctrine that every society requires a wider social environment leads to the distinction that a society may be more or less stabilized, in reference to certain sorts of changes in that environment. A society is stabilized in reference to a species of change when it can persist through an environment whose relevant parts exhibit that sort of change. If the society would cease to persist through an environment with that sort of heterogeneity, then the society is in that respect unstable. A complex society which is stable provided that the environment exhibits certain features is said to be specialized in respect to those features. The notion of specialization seems to include both that of complexity and that of strictly conditioned stability. An unspecialized society can survive through important changes in its environment. This means that it can take on different functions in respect to its relationship to a changing environment. In general, the defining characteristic of such a society will not include any particular determination of structural pattern. By reason of this flexibility of structural pattern, the society can adopt that special pattern adapted to the circumstances of the moment. Thus an unspecialized society is apt to be deficient in structural pattern, when viewed as a whole.